All right, looks like we're live. Hey everybody. I apologize for the delay. We seem to have run into some technical issues on this side. It's our 100th episode. Thank you. While restarting the computer and trying to figure out how this all works, I've been reading everybody's fantastic comments. I want to thank everybody for making this the most fun experience I've had with drawing. So thank you so much for everybody. I can't believe we're at 100 episodes already. So this is what we're drawing today. It'll be a piece of cake for everybody. So if you were stressing out about it, don't worry. So today, shaking things up a little bit. You'll notice if you click on the reference image, there's actually 4 images to draw from. I thought it'd be kind of fun to kind of open that up to see what everybody would want, because especially with a subject like this, it can be simpler, by having the whole cake, where you're basically dealing with, really kind of locking down the form of the cake, the cylindrical form of it, plus some additional challenges by adding the slice in there. And you can see that the one I have right below me here is the slice of cake. It's the piece of cake. And so that's what I'll be drawing today, because that's what I feel like drawing. I don't really have a good reason for it. It just seemed like it was more fun. But if you feel like drawing anything else, any of the other references, go right ahead. I'm going to be working in charcoal today. I've got some of these Faber-Castell pit charcoal pencils, a variety of soft, medium, and 2 mediums and a soft that I'll be working with. I've got my trusty rubber and kneaded erasers. I've got I got a white charcoal. I'll give that a shot today. I might use it. I don't know. This is the first time I've done a drawing for the show without having done a preparatory drawing, so I'm a little bit nervous. I might have done one other, and it was really sketchy, no pun intended. I've got my blending stumps, and I've got some vine charcoal today. So I'm just going to kind of wing it, because I'm just excited to eat cake, so I'm a little bit distracted. So this is Amy's in downtown Longmont here in Colorado. She provided that. So thank you everybody for joining. I love seeing all the celebratory comments. It's so many of you have been with us since the very beginning, and it is quite an honor to have that and to connect with you all in this way. So as always, if you're new, you're going to want to know that you can follow along by pulling up the reference image. It's in the link below. Again, there's 4 of them this week, so you can kind of choose your own adventure. And then in the background that I have, these are just some kind of fun kind of previous drawings that we've worked with. So if you are new, check out all the old episodes, all 99 of them previous to this. So and then this is a little hat that I've got. It's kind of getting cropped off, but I might take that off because it is uncomfortable, but it's a party, right? So let's have fun. Hopefully we'll do another 100. We'll see. I realized that we reached 100 pretty quickly in the show, because we started out fairly aggressive at 3 days a week, and that was challenging to maintain. So then we dropped down to 1 day a week. So I recognize the next 100, it's going to take 2 years, which is pretty wild. All right. So any questions, comments, feel free to throw them in the chat. I love hearing everybody's comments here, and thank you all again. I'd love to hear, what are some of your favorite episodes? If you're new, ask any questions, comments, share your own experiences with drawing, because this is really all about us just getting together to draw. And I'm going to talk through the decisions that I make as I go and some of the techniques I use, but it may be different than what you use or other people that are watching. So I really like it when people that are viewing kind of throw out contrary opinions or observations, anything, because that's what it's all about. So let's get to it. Hi, Rachel. And Britton, if you're watching. So, all right, let's get to it. We need to draw. I'm going to take this hat off though, because it is a little uncomfortable. What I'm working on today is Legion sent out some paper, and I've been using their rag papers a lot lately. This is a bamboo paper, and I will post the specific paper that I used at the end of the show. I'll look it up. I want to make sure that I get it right. But it was kind of a last minute decision. I just was kind of winging it today, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. So all right. what am I going to do? Okay, so one of the reasons I chose this point of view to work with is if you've got some interesting forms. You've got the disc of the plate, and then you've got the wedge of the cake. And then you also have a strong light and shadow contrast. And so if you're pulling up any of the other reference images, that's kind of what I was thinking as well, is trying to set up some lighting that gave you some value contrast to work with to create the form. So if you're drawing from the whole piece of cake, then your challenge is to create that cylindrical form. If you're drawing from this here with the slice removed, then you've got an additional kind of set of planes that are added to that cylinder that are going to add to the challenge, as well as some light and shadow. So now, generally the process that I go through for a drawing is to start with the gesture. And oh, there's my cake. I had lost it. So I have the big image up here on my left. I've got the tiny thumbnail there. Again, it's all about kind of building up from the gesture. So we're going to start with that. If you're working with graphite, if you use just a light graphite, and especially if you're able to kind of carve away some of the wood casing to show some more of the core, that can be helpful. Let's get right to it. I've never worked with this bamboo paper before, so I'm really excited. It's really heavy, like it's a thick paper, which I love. I really enjoy working on kind of heavyweight paper. And so right away I can feel the tooth. It's different than the cotton rag papers. I do want to do a little test to see how it erases. Ooh, it lifts really well. I like it. I like that. All right. White Rabbit and Odin, our favorite episodes from Karen. Well, hopefully if we've done our jobs right, we will kind of inspire anybody who observes our drawing to want to eat cake as well. So what I'm doing is just reacting to the form, trying to think both in terms of line as well as shape. You can see I kind of blocked in this major shape here, that shadow, reacting to the angles as I feel them, moving my eyes quickly back and forth, and accepting at this early stage that these proportions are wildly inaccurate. And I'm seeing some areas that need to be adjusted. But that's good. I want to make mistakes in this gesture, because then I've committed very little time, and I have room to improve. So I want to be thinking about, in addition to kind of the basic form, thinking through how everything's fitting on the page, kind of thinking through the balance between light and dark, seeing if I'm going to make any editorial decisions as I go, if I'm going to leave anything out, if I'm going to be more direct in how I kind of capture this and refer to the reference. Thomas is saying, favorite episode, mountain scene with a river crossing the foreground. Oh yes, I like that one. That was a good one. All right, thank you everybody. It's very rewarding hearing everybody's comments, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much. It's what we were hoping for out of this show, is just to build a community around drawing, because I think drawing is important. It's important for me, and I recognize that I'm a little bit biased because of that, but I find it rewarding to draw, because it helps me it just balances the brain, right? It helps bring everything into focus. It does become kind of a form of meditation for me. And that's the way it's always kind of functioned in my life. So it's very satisfying creating a work that looks good, but we talk about that a lot in the show, in the past at least, is kind of identifying with the difference between drawing and the drawing, right? There's the act of drawing, and then there's the result, and we all have our own kind of association with that with that balance. And I think I prioritize the action over the product. But all right, so what I'm doing is now that I've got the basic form established, I'm kind of going quickly back and forth between the small thumbnail and the larger one. And if you're new to drawing, I'm intentionally using a vine charcoal. It's very light, and I'm using an overhand grip to keep the marks light. I want them to be light and loose. I want to be thinking about drawing as though I'm drawing in sand or something that's impermanent, because I need to take some time to figure out what I'm really looking at here. It becomes really overwhelming to approach a subject and feel like you have to have a thorough understanding of it before you start to draw. That's the whole value in drawing, as far as I'm concerned, is that you're using the drawing process to better understand your world. And so that just becomes part of the process. We're thinking through the medium of charcoal or graphite, and we're using that process to better understand what it is that we're encountering. In this case, it's this awesome piece of, happens to be gluten-free cake, which is kind of cool. I'm not particularly gluten-free, but I like it. It's good stuff. But so I think, again, if you're new and you're kind of intimidated, I would just kind of recommend staying in a gesture as long as possible. So much good drawing happens when you're just keeping things light and loose, reacting to the form, rather than applying that level of pressure on yourself to create something that is precise and controlled, especially early on. It can feel really satisfying when you create something that's highly detailed, and I love that a lot. But I recognize just in my process, I've had better success when I come into that later, and I really just enjoy the gesture process as much as possible, and embrace the messy thinking that happens in drawing. And then sometimes if you just let the materials do their own thing, you can discover new techniques and new effects from your materials. All right. Greg is saying the lighthouse and Old Town Road. Awesome. That's interesting. Definitely, I really like the lighthouse, Pemaquid Point. That was a fun one. That Old Town Road, I'd forgotten about that one. And then Heather saying the white retriever. Oh, cool. Cats, landscapes, figurative pieces. Bramble saying the skull. Excellent. Actually, we did 2 skulls. I think the second one turned out a little bit better. All right. So kind of getting back into thinking about how drawing affects the mood. I feel like I'm really scattered today because I've been looking forward to this day and really thinking through what we're going to do. All right. So now I have the basic form established. I need to go through and correct it. So as I said earlier, I need to accept going into the process that I'm going to make mistakes and things are going to be inaccurate. But it's helpful to make accurate decisions when you have something to react to. So now that we actually have forms on the page, I can look at it and make specific decisions. So one of the things I see, for example, is that the opening of the plate, this vertical distance of the plate feels too much. So I need to shorten that. The proportions of the cake are off, but I don't know, just looking at it, what's wrong with it. So I'm going to have to slow things down a little bit. So what do I need to do? Let's see. Oh, Craig is asking if I think I'll do anything with colored pencils. I was just talking about that yesterday, actually. I'm going to give it a shot at some point. It's really intimidating. But I may try some kind of water-soluble colored pencils or water-soluble pencils and introduce color that way as a way to kind of bridge into a colored pencil or something. So it's awesome. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your favorite episodes. There's a lot coming in. Oh, the skull and llamas dog. Huh, interesting, the pug. All right. Okay, back to correcting the proportions. I feel like what I've done is I have, the piece of cake is the centerpiece, right? So when I look at it, my brain is making it larger than it actually is. So optically, it's actually quite a bit smaller if I look at the proportions of the photograph than what I've drawn here. So then the question is do I want to keep that large and maybe alter the view a little bit, maybe zoom in a bit, or do I want to be more truthful to the reference photo? And I think I want to crop in. I feel like in the reference photo there's plenty of space there. All right, so what that means then is I need to give myself an anchor. I need to set certain proportions and then build everything else around him. So, and then Heather's asking about pastels episode. That would be a good one. Pastels are a little bit tricky just because when you buy them, there's so many that you can buy. So the color choices that I might make are going to be different than another set. But if anybody's interested just in seeing how it's done, I can certainly look into doing that. All right, so okay, so back to this. I think what I want to do is I want to make sure that the plate doesn't go any lower than this. So let me set that as an anchor. I kind of like this distance here. So then this becomes an anchor, the top of the slice there. Oh, and so has anybody else drawn along? And if you are, which reference photo do you happen to be working from? I'm kind of curious. All right, so if I know that this side can be kind of flexible, wipe this down, reestablish. Okay, so here's the bottom edge of the plate, top edge of the slice. So I need to compare the dimensions of the pie, the cake to the plate. And one key thing are the intersection points. Those are really important, and that's essentially what we're doing when we're using plumb lines and horizontal guides, is we're creating intersections in our drawing. So if you're new to that, if I just said plumb lines and you're like, what? Then here's what it is. So a plumb line is really just, it's an imaginary line that we apply to the reference image, building off reference points in the image, and so in the subject. So you can do that by closing one eye, holding your pencil or charcoal vertically and aligning it, placing it on top of your reference. And you can do those are your plumb lines, and then a horizontal guide is just simply a horizontal line that does that. So what I'm looking at is that intersection in that back edge of the plate and where it intersects with the main forms of the cake. And so if this is the top here and I establish this line here, that gives me a dimension. And I can compare that dimension to then the opening of the plate. And this is where perspective gets really tricky, because the literal truth of that plate is that it's round. And that's a very important thing to know about an object, is that it's actually a round plate. The optical truth is that it's an ellipse. It's a circle that's in perspective. So our brain is then having to encounter that conflict between the optical truth of the ellipse and the literal truth of the circle. And most often it'll default to the literal truth. It'll think that it's the circular dimension that is most critical for us to understand this world, understand what we're looking at. So then our brain says circle, 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 and we tend to draw it as a circle, tend to have it be a bit more open. What we're trying to do by using some of these tools is to override that part of our brain that is locking into the literal truth of the scene, and instead relying on optical information, right? And so we have to say, all right, this isn't a circle. I'm just going to say it's not a circle. It's something else. And so we're going to build it from there. Now there are tools that you can use in perspective to help lock in the particular form of an ellipse. But I'm not going to use those here. I might try to address it a little bit later if it kind of comes out. But for me, like if I like to think about like what what are really the most important things to think about. And so I'll end up using the same kind of set of decisions throughout my drawing process. So plumb lines, horizontal guides, and then angle sighting is another one, another way to lock into the optical truth of the subject. And then the way we're thinking about that is if you get the optical truth established in your drawing, then the viewer will encounter it and it'll make sense optically, and they'll understand that that plate is actually a circle and that they understand the dimension of that cake slice. So that kind of gets, perhaps that's a bit overwhelming for somebody who's kind of new, but that's generally the way I like to think about it. And it can sometimes be helpful to think about, well, if you are struggling with perspective and proportions, what's at the root of that? And it's, like I said, it's often it's our cells fighting our brain. So I'm giving myself a little bit more information. And so what I to this intersection point. So I've got the top edge here. I've got that intersection. There's that thin dark line at the top, and it comes down. There's this other intersection here. And as I come down here, now what I observe is that this is too tight, right? It's not lining up the way it needs to. Something's off there. So we're gonna keep making decisions and adjusting until we figure it out. So if I were to actually drop this down a little bit more, I don't like how close that's getting to the edge. So I'm going to actually wipe this down now. It's kind of like shaking an Etch-a-Sketch. And I'm just going to focus on this bottom part here now. So focus on that bottom edge of the plate, and I'm kind of reacting to that overall angle. And what you might find helpful is to try to break the curves down into sequences of shorter straight marks. You can often arrive at something that's a bit more accurate and precise by doing that. Okay, so let's build this up a little bit. So just comparing the reference image to the drawing right now, I'm happier with this overall form. There's a bit of an axis to the plate that's not perfectly horizontal. And so I'm going to kind of drop that in there to see how that impacts things. And now I want to evaluate the distance between this front edge here and the left and the right sides. And what I observe in the reference photo is that it's not quite in the center. It's pretty close, but it's a little bit more to the left there. So that's generally in the right area. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a different kind of tack, a different approach. So again, we're still just focusing on proportions, but I tried it one way of establishing this upper edge, kind of working my way down, and it didn't help. So now I'm kind of building from the bottom up a bit and going by how this feels here, this gap. Do some angle sighting. So an angle sighting, if you're new, well, all I'm doing is I'm closing one eye to flatten my depth perception, and I'm lining this up with this edge on the reference image. So I'm targeting that angle, finding that angle, locking my wrist, then bringing it across and placing it directly on top of the drawing. So I have a projection of the drawing in front of me. So in that way, I can align the angle from the reference with the angle in the drawing to kind of approximate that. And I'm going to let that line run long because I don't quite know how deep I need to make this. All right, if anybody has any questions, I'm not seeing any questions, but I do see a lot of comments, so I want to acknowledge those. I do want to keep going because I'm a little bit late today. So, But if anybody has any questions, if you type them in all caps, I'm more likely to see them. Now I want to get this angle here, so I'm generally pretty happy with that. And again, let that run long. Now, so now I'm kind of just going by gut right now, but I want to start to make things a bit more accurate. So now I've got the width dimension to establish, right? And I can go by gut there, but so far that hasn't served me very well. So I need to change my approach a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some comparative measuring to evaluate the width of this distance here between the back and the front edges and compare that to this. So again, closing one eye, I'm aligning this edge of the charcoal with the left edge of the cake slice, sliding my finger down until it aligns with that front corner. I get 1, 2, 3, almost 4, about 3.5. So this width becomes 1 unit. I should be able to get 1, 2, 3.5. All right, and you can see that it's not quite working out that way. So what I'm feeling is that I keep making this too wide, and that's part of my brain is saying I know that there's a large surface of that cake slice that's there, but because of this angle, it's squishing it down. I'm shearing kind of across it, and it's making this thin sliver. And if I go just by how it feels, I'm actually making it too wide. So I need to cut this back in. So now if I take that width and I go, there's that dimension there, I'm going to carry across. So 1, 2, let's see. And that's a little bit closer now. And I'm just going to drop in that shadow to indicate that edge, because looking at the reference image, it's actually a pretty subtle line. So I can start to think through the basic value structure, positive and negative space there. Samantha, go get your chocolate cake. Anybody else got some cake? Go for it. All right, so yeah, so I'm bringing that in. It feels like it's too narrow, but I'm going to trust it. And now I'm going to compare the angle at that top. So what we're comparing is this angle here to this angle down in here. And again, this is where our brains kind of can sometimes get in the way, because we know literally that this bottom edge and the top edge are parallel, but optically they're not, because this bottom edge is a little bit farther away. So I like to use angle sighting to lock in those angles. But it can be helpful to kind of go into it knowing right off the bat that those angles are going to be different. And all right, so I'm happy with those. And now I'm going to create just a general angle across the back. It's curved, but it's mostly a straight edge. I'm going to visualize it as a straight edge for now. And in that way, I just want to get that basic form established. And I kind of lost this edge here. So I'm still using the vine charcoal. So I think I need to switch to the compressed charcoal now to make some more permanent marks. Now there's this center kind of raspberry filling, and it looks wicked good. I'm going to drop those in. So it might be helpful again to use angle sighting to get that, or I mean you can kind of think of them generally as it's like an intermediate angle between the bottom and the top. So as the rules of perspective might say, is the closer we get to our eye level, the more horizontal those lines are going to come, and they kind of radiate down and out, right? And so as if we have a steeper angle here, we're getting a little bit more horizontal at the top. This is going to be somewhere in the middle, all right? And you kind of think about them as radiating outward from there. Now, if you want to kind of actually find the vanishing point, you could kind of do that by extending those lines off. but it would run off the edge of the paper, and for me, it just adds another step that it can be helpful, but I think sometimes unnecessary if you rely on the angle sighting. So again, part of what I like to think about when thinking about what's important to teach and talk about is try to curate out some of the techniques and try to simplify it as much as possible. All right. All right, we'll move to the medium charcoal pencil here. I kind of like the tone that is being built up by the vine charcoal in that background. It's a really interesting tooth to this paper. Again, this is that bamboo paper that Legion makes, and I'll share the specifics with it. Really interesting surface. So it seems to be holding the charcoal well, and it releases it well. So that's kind of the big thing. Some people like to ask, how do you get started with charcoal? And I think it's as important to think about the paper as it is the charcoal itself. You want to make sure you get a piece of paper that is designed for charcoal specifically. All right, so now that I have that basic form established, I can start to add some specificity. All right, what am I doing here? Actually, I'm going to do some negative drawing, so grab my eraser, and I need to observe the larger masses. This kind of reminds me of Wayne Thiebaud a little bit. So even though I am kind of cleaning up lines here, my main thought is to continue to refine the form. And I found that often serves me well, is if I have that mindset of always contributing to the form. So I have this eraser, and it's designed to essentially correct mistakes, but when you use it as a mark making tool, it can open doors. It's lifting off pretty well. I do have my white charcoal that I can introduce if I need to lift off stronger highlights. For those of you who are Artist Network members, we're going to been working with some guest artists to put together a kind of a special Zoom kind of art party event where we'll be, to kind of celebrate the 100th episode, we'll be doing that. I'll bring on a couple guest artists, and you all can there on Zoom and hopefully be able to connect that way. So look for more of that information. We should be posting that soon. Actually, I'm going to use my kneaded eraser. If you're working with charcoal paper and it's not lifting to the bright white of the page, that's all right. I feel like my drawing improved when I kind of shed that desire for precision with the whites, right? And the preciousness of that white of the page. It became too cumbersome to me to have to be thinking about the drawing and protecting the paper. And it felt far more freeing to just accept that we're going to knock down those whites. It's not going to, we're going to lose the intensity of that white. And then what you start to develop are strategies for managing that. So if you're kind of at that stage, I can kind of see it happening with this drawing here. is on the page, I'm not getting back to that pure white of the page, and that's all right. What I'm going to do is drop the value down all around it, and the contrast will be equivalent. And we'll have to make some editorial decisions to help make that work. But if you find that you're getting frustrated by charcoal in particular because you're not preserving the white of the page, I don't know as if I'm the right person to give you strategies to prevent that, because I just learned to accept it. Again, it's just, I feel like drawing is so much of a fight in a way, right? I like the drawings that show the struggle in its development, and it can be a struggle, and I like seeing mistakes that have been corrected and smudges that don't belong, things like that, because it just shows more about the artist's kind of process behind it. But again, that's kind of my sensibility, and what I love about drawing is that everybody has their own way through drawing. So, but if you're looking for advice on how to preserve the white of the page, I will throw that out to the community for suggestions. I know some of you will use like parchment paper or something like that to help preserve it, or a maul stick or something that helps keep the hand off the page. But all right, so I'm starting to make this bottom edge a bit more precise now. And I'm thinking now both in terms of line and value. So as I look at this edge, rather than draw a hard line around there, I'm trying to visualize that path and maybe kind of lightly indicate it, but mostly think about creating a value edge there. And in doing that, really creates a stronger effect of light and shadow. So, because lines don't exist in nature, right? They're abstract symbols for edges, and it's very normal to render things using lines. They're very dominant symbol systems for us. But if you're going for a sense of realism, then you might try to think about getting rid of those outlines as much as possible, or the contour lines. So I'm using the pencil, holding it really far back to keep the pressure light and engage the side of the pencil as much as possible. And I'm still primarily looking at the small thumbnail to draw from rather than, I have this larger one here that I can use for greater detail. But that larger one is actually, it's an inhibition at this point, because I'll get sucked into those details if I try to look at that big reference at this point. So I need to force myself into seeing kind of broad areas and removing those details. And if you keep your marks light and loose, you can kind of sneak up on the image a little bit more. All right, how is everybody doing? Oh, Tina is asking, do I speak other languages? I do not, and I wish I did. I have tried kind of half-heartedly to learn Spanish, French, and German. And it does not go well. And like I said, I'm part of that because I don't commit to it, but I wish I did. My son is now taking German lessons from a friend who teaches French and German, so I'm very jealous of his opportunity there. But all right, so really what I'm doing, we talked a bit about this last week, but the approach to detail it might be helpful, because one thing I've observed with some beginning students in the past is, like I kind of mentioned earlier, that the feeling you get when you really lock those details in, it's hard to beat that. It feels so good, right? It's so satisfying, and we often want to jump to that very quickly, because that's where the joy is, for many people. For me, it one of the things that was helpful is when I shifted to away from thinking about detail and thinking more about refinement, if that makes sense. So what I'm thinking about when I'm saying that is that I'm starting with broad forms and I'm gradually refining the edges and being selective about where to refine them. And in that, detail starts to emerge. It's that where we refine the edges is where it's an opportunity for the viewer's mind to fill in some of the missing information, right? That's where the viewer's eyes and mind will invent and fill in details that aren't actually there. And it can be a little bit more forgiving, right? And then, because sometimes if a drawing becomes too overwhelming with details so that we lose the form, it can become visually challenging for a viewer to make sense of. And I think that, so it's the I really enjoy seeing artwork that is highly detailed, but in which the form is still retained, right? It doesn't become so overwhelming that we can't make sense of it all. So, but you might think about it again, if you're struggling with detail and how to manage detail, see what happens if you shift your thinking to the idea of refining edges versus adding detail. So you're building up the whole drawing at once. And that's perhaps kind of more of an issue that is of kind of a painting practice. But yeah. Oh, Tina Alexander asks a big question. How do we define art? Huh. That is a really good question. And it's actually something I think about quite a bit, because when we see so much art around us all the time, and especially if you're practicing and you're learning with other students, one of the assumptions that we can make is that we all interpret and understand art to serve the same function, where I feel like it can be different for each of us. And so I think it's a good question for everybody. Ooh, so here, okay, I'm going to get back to that art question. But now what I'm observing here is that I'm trying to clean up that edge. Now, if that back corner of the cake is established here, and I've got this back corner, if I were to connect those two, that angle is all wrong, right? So I need to figure out something there. I think I do need to bring this in a little bit here. But kind of getting back to the art, I think there are a variety of impulses for making art, and that it's going to be different for you than it is for me and everybody else. We're each going to have our own kind of association with that. So I think there's one impulse for art, which is to simply make the statement that I am here, right? It's being present in the moment. You've got materials, you got your brain, and it's all happening. You're processing thoughts and you're reacting to those thoughts with the materials all at one time. And then, somebody else might come along and say, well, for me, it's about looking out and understanding the world a little bit better. And then somebody else might look at it and say, well, what's the meaning behind what I'm observing? What stories can I tell? How can I influence people with this image? Those are all very different impulses. And and I think it makes a difference when we identify what is our core impulse here, and it may be a combination of them all. But you know, if you're an artist who is trying to influence people through your art by, you know, changing the way we think about a topic or a subject, anything, right? You know, if we're trying to kind of editorialize our world and transform something through art, then that's one impulse. If it's really kind of a personal thing, if it's like a form of meditation, that's a very different thing, right? And so that's a really tricky question to ask. And so I really like the idea of opening that up to the conversation here in the group. Samantha went back and got sea salt caramel ice cream. Holy smokes, that sounds good. Nice. Okay, so I'm really kind of locking down on this bottom edge. I was so far off earlier. So what I'm doing is I'm really trying to identify these points here. And so if I close one eye and I angle sight and I try to, it's difficult to see that back corner, but I'm going to try to visualize where it is as much as possible, align it with this corner and get that angle. My arm is in the way. I feel like that gets a little bit closer. Now I'm making the assumption that this side here is kind of vertical. I think, and now very subtle changes to this angle are going to change that back intersection point. So take some time to really lock that down. That where that slice of cake makes contact with the plate is really important. If we get the perspective of that plate established from one point of view, and then we think about that cake as being different, it's possible then to have it be wonky, kind of a cubist perspective, almost looking down at the cake and across the plate, or down at the plate and across the cake. You know, we want them to be one unified thing, if you're going for a sense of realism, that is. But that's where I'm kind of getting stuck, because it's such a key thing, is getting those points right, getting this essentially triangular shape correct here. All right. Now my mind's on defining what art is. That's a good question. Okay. This again is still my kind of centerpiece, my focal point, but I'm going to move to some other area that maybe requires a little less thinking. So just soft circular marks over on this area to build up smooth areas of tone where the lip of the plate is in shadow. So with the light coming in from this angle here, it's catching on this lip, and then we fall into that slight bowl of the plate, that slight downward incline, where that falls into shadow. And as we come across, the light starts to catch more on this side and then cast a shadow here. So those terms that we're looking at there are cast shadows and form shadows. So this is the cast shadow of the plate. This is the form shadow. It's the shadow on the form of the plate that gives it its sense of form and volume. Now, I'm also observing that there are these kind of subtle reflections, and every part of me right now wants to dig in and get those reflections in, and I need to resist that urge because I know it's going to mess me up if I get to it too early. Now I'm going to take I need to compare the width to the height of the plate. So I'm taking that measurement of the height, this measurement here, and I'm comparing it across this way. So if I take that height and I compare it to the width, then this dimension here, that's just about right. It should put me right about to the edge of the cake. So from this edge to this is about the same as the height. and then I can carry it across, and it puts me right in the shadow. Okay, so I feel like in general I'm in decent shape there. I might need to refine it a little bit farther, but as long as I'm in the ballpark at this point. Now what I need to do is I need to correct this angle here. It's a little bit too steep. So I use my eraser to do that. And so kind of alternating between using the eraser to adjust an edge and then charcoal, because if I stick with the charcoal, it can get a little bit cumbersome, a little clumsy. And this needs to come in here, so it's there we go. Bring that in. I don't want that too bright because this is all going to be in shadow. I shouldn't be using my fingertips because that adds oils. No. I have the slice of cake right here ready to eat, and I just brushed my little charcoal and eraser bits onto it. I guess that's fitting to have that happen on this 100th episode of Drawing Together. But yeah, I think it was a good question about, really where does the impulse for creating lie within each of us. I think it could be helpful to identify that, because then when we're out soliciting feedback from people, we can clearly state, well, what is your objective here? Because I'm not, if I were to look at this, for example, I'm not trying to make any sort of political statement or change something. I'm just here to be present and kind of bring myself into focus, be present with you all and with this subject. And if this was some sort of illustration or storytelling piece, then you have to kind of consider other things as well. We might make different decisions and different commentary if you're asking for feedback, things like that. So, all right, what do I need to do? What do I need to do? I need to get rid of this value down in here. I kind of like the light that's forming out of this, so it's not looking like the photograph, but I feel like now I'm kind of identifying the forms pretty well. The overall proportions, we're going to need to make some slight adjustments to some of these edges, but we're going to be working with some values there. Right now what's happening is there's a bit of a halo forming around the cake. So we get this kind of dark edge that's coming in around a lot of it, and that's interrupting that sense of form. So I'm going to deal with that now. And Adele is saying, to me, the art is the drive to create in any form or medium. Yeah, I can definitely align with that. One of the things that I go back to are those early cave paintings from Lascaux and places like that. We've got these things that are 40, 50,000 years old, and you can kind of sense the processing of information in the minds behind the people who created those. And I think it's so cool that we can look at that and feel some sort of connection with the thought process that went into making it. And so that's I recognize my own kind of particular bias in art making is towards kind of evidence of the thinking that goes into creating it. So I look at Leonardo's sketchbooks, for example, and I find them more interesting than the Mona Lisa. That was worked on so much that it's taken on this otherworldly status, right? It's a different thing, and it's been worked on so much that it almost feels like it's hard to believe that a human created it, versus the sketches that are deeply human, right? And so you can see how both examples of his work can be appreciated in different ways. All right, so I'm just kind of softening up some of these edges, letting this fall into shadow. This is a tricky thing, and I'm kind of regretting a little bit in the reference photo that I didn't think through this contrast here. It's causing a bit of trouble because I don't have much to really latch onto. So I'm working on this edge here. And I think I'll just kind of lock in on this surface a little bit. And I need to work back and forth between the plate and that slice there. So I'm just going to keep this really subtle. If I squint my eyes, this whole area, those edges get really obscured, difficult to really make sense of. And so I don't want my drawing to be more explicit about those edges than the reality of it. So squinting helps to do that. If you squint at something and an edge disappears, it shows you that the value relationship between them is actually very close. When we stare at something, our brain tends to heighten that value contrast, and that can be challenging for us. So that's one of the reasons why squinting is so helpful. All right, we're coming up on an hour that we've been drawing here. I feel like I need to move things along, and I am feeling the the effect of not having drawn this before. Again, I'm kind of going into this cold, where I normally have had done a preparatory drawing before the live session to help me think through some of these issues and make it a little bit speedier for you all, but I don't have that. So this is going to be tricky on here because there's a lot of information. We've got a couple big globs of the icing on top and all the confetti stuff in the back. What I'm looking at are the shapes of the light, though. I'm going to try to not think about them as objects, as specific objects, and instead thinking about them as just shapes of light and shadow. Try to capture that. So it's helpful to have this eraser here. It's this retractable eraser that I took a razor blade to, and I kind of created this kind of wedge, this chisel tip, and that gives me the ability to create a sharp edge as well as a broad stroke. About it more as almost a paintbrush. There's a little bit of light kind of catching back in here. And then right in here, the plate gets really bright. So we've got the light catching in behind here, and I need that to help sharpen up that edge. Again, as we start to encroach on decisions around detail, we're thinking about it in terms of refining edges more than adding detail. This gets really bright in here. Don't worry about breaking up an edge. So rather than thinking about it as one smooth curve, I'm trying to observe the various sections of that curve and then piece them together. And then hopefully they'll all come together to create the effect of a smooth curve. Now, that's the thing about kind of direct observation, is when we look at something like that, we can't take in that whole curve as as one. You know, what we do is we take quick glances around it and our brain pieces it together. And so a broken drawing, broken edges are actually quite comfortable for viewers' eyes, brains to accept. It was something that I really had a hard time embracing at first. I felt like I had to become super explicit about certain things, otherwise the viewer wouldn't understand what I'm trying to say. And then over time you realize that, you know, by making a lot of mistakes, some of those mistakes end up working out in your favor. And so, you know, I would have a broken edge that I didn't quite intend, and it worked. I thought, well, let me try to do that on purpose. And then you find that balance. If it's too broken, then it gets weird for the viewer's brain to make sense of, and so you want to find that balance. So. Okay. Heather's saying, I think creating art comes from seeing the beauty of a person, animal, place, or moment in time and wanting to interpret, record that moment in any medium that expresses it. Well said. I like that. Yeah. It looks like a new person, Scorpdesi. Hello, hello. Welcome. So good evening all. I have drawn for many years from imagination and photos, but landscapes and still life frustrate me so much. I get very disheartened, so I don't do them. Any tips to stop this? Ooh, good question. Let me think. I think, you know, the approach that I kind of take in this show is to try to conceive of the drawing process as a set of decisions, right? You know, we make decisions about value, proportion, line versus shape, texture, composition, things like that. We make a lot of decisions throughout the drawing process. And one of the challenges is, you know, applying those sets of decisions to various mediums. And one of the reasons we meet every week with a different subject is that by changing up the subject, it allows us to kind of confront those decisions in a new way. And so, and kind of better understand them and become more confident. So one of the things that might be happening for you is that if you're thinking about a landscape as fundamentally different from drawing a portrait or a still life, then it may be influencing the decisions you make. And it might be helpful to try to just ignore the subject altogether. So once you've decided what to draw, you put all your thought into what you're going to draw and deciding the subject there. When you're ready to draw, then forget all that and just try to think about it in terms of abstract shapes, values, proportions, things like that. And so I say that having suffered with that same issue quite a bit. I talk about that in the show. Is I struggle with portraits, and part of what's happening with that is that I'm treating that drawing differently. I'm not trusting the decisions that I'm making in my kind of training, and so I need to fall back on what do I do know. It just go through, build from a gesture, correct the proportions, and then refine the edges as you go. And kind of trust that if the drawing process works for one subject, it's going to work for all subjects. And so I don't know if that's helpful at all, but again, it's something that I know for me I struggle with, and try to just power through. But there is something about drawing a portrait for me, for example, that where I naturally kind of tighten up and I get to the detail too early and I have to force myself to change that. also be forgiving to yourself, because you know, you're going to do hundreds of drawings in your life, hopefully, right? And if we put too much pressure on ourselves to make each drawing great, then it can sometimes suck the joy out of the whole process. So, you know, if you enjoy the drawing process, even if the drawing itself doesn't look great, you've had a good time. But I don't know if I've ever made a good drawing that came out as a result of an unpleasant drawing experience. So, and you know, I think it's important to get excited by opportunities for improvement in every work. And I think I've said that here before. I think the last thing I want is a work where I'm 100% happy with it. You know, it's similar to gamification in a way, right? You know, it's like there's always one level to beat. There's one thing I could do kind of better next time, and that gets exciting. So identify, well, what are you doing well in your work, and what could be improved, so that you can repeat what you've done well, and you can focus on improving specific elements that need it. All right, so what am I thinking? I'm kind of going through and just refining some of these forms here. Again, where I need to. I'm mostly looking at the space around the slice of cake at this point. So if I look at this is where it's really important to set your work up vertically and look at it from a distance. So when I see the projection in front of me, I see a lot of the little issues that aren't apparent when I'm looking at it in real life, right? So when I look at it at this angle, this line here looks just fine. But when I look at it in the overhead view there, something's not quite right. So I want to continue to kind of massage that. And then I want to just look at the overall perspective of the plate. And so I had identified early an axis to this plate that I think is throwing everything off. It's a bit too, I had drawn it too steep. So I need to bring this up a little bit. And when I look at this, when I'm comparing, I'm kind of moving back and forth between the drawing and the reference. What I feel like is that at this point, this right in here is not so bad. You know, I might be able to make some slight adjustments. But it's this curve in here that is off. So I was kind of going with how it felt more than how it looked, and it was kind of messing things up a little bit. So now I'm just making subtle adjustments, maybe kind of pushing up a little bit here, cutting into it with the eraser, and then building the charcoal up on this edge to adjust it. And to me, that's where, again, where drawing gets really exciting. See evidence on here of that evolution. And so had I drawn a hard line and kind of filled it in, it'd be really difficult to adjust it now. And so that's kind of why I kind of settled on this process for drawing. You know, again, it's kind of the way I was encouraged to draw in college, is this more kind of a painterly approach, the idea of it being kind of flexible and movable, and you're adding and subtracting all throughout the entire process. It was a bit challenging for me to adopt that. I trusted it, but I didn't quite get it. I would still kind of default to creating kind of contour lines and then filling in. And just over time, I realized that all I was doing is I kept fighting that line that I established early on. And it wasn't serving me. And then, so I kept trying the approach that, again, I was kind of taught, which is to this way of kind of building the whole drawing up at once, because it ultimately got me to an end result that was more satisfying. So this ellipse here is I'm fighting it. I'm getting a little obsessive with it right now, so I'm going to step away from it because I very little good has come out of when I get into that mode of obsession over that line. That's when distortions happen. That's when my brain wants it to be something that it isn't. So just using the palm of my hand to smooth this out. Let me think about what I want to do now. Let me see how that axis feels. So I'm obsessing over this line right now. Right in here, it looks right from here. This looks right. That looks wrong. It's so frustrating. I'm gonna listen to myself, move away from it, and come back to it. That's what I'm gonna do. All right, I'm gonna get in there. I kind of like the idea of I'm gonna let everything kind of be kind of loose, atmospheric, and now I'm gonna start to bring in the refinement and details in certain elements. Let's see. All right, I love seeing all these new names. So welcome. If you are new, I want to welcome you all to the 100th episode. Can't believe it. Tina's saying, what do you think of this definition of art? Art is nature being tamed. Do you need an explanation? I don't know as if I need an explanation, but I'd be curious. I think in the way we describe things, we can sometimes come to a deeper understanding. I mean, I don't know as if I agree. I have an initial reaction that says that I feel some tension around that right now, where I think I agree, but I don't. There's part of me that's fighting that, and I don't know why, but I'd be curious. I think, here's where the part of me kind of conflicts with that, is that as a landscape painter, when I'm out on location, I like to think that what I'm trying to capture is my experience in that landscape, which means that I affect the landscape. It's not me and nature, it's me in nature. It's part of it, right? And I feel like that's something that Cezanne addressed in his work, and other great landscape painters. And so I think that's where I'm kind of butting up against that definition, is the idea that somehow we as artists are separate from the nature that we're observing. But I don't know. I think that's just my own idea about that. That's what I love about art, is that we each have our own way through it. Okay. I just I got distracted and I started fixating on the curve of the plate again. Your question got me. I love it. Okay. I'm gonna stay focused. I'm gonna work on this. I'm gonna work on this cake. That's what I'm gonna do. Okay. The ellipses, Greg is saying ellipses are frustrating. They sure are. They're really hard. But we'll see. Okay. See if we can tame it. I do. There is something about the word tame that is interesting, though. All right. Let me see, pick up this other medium pit charcoal. And I'm gonna start kind of working from the background forward, refining this edge. So this is where I'm gonna work from the larger reference image that's next to me here. And as as we're working on that edge, what I'm going to try to do is not use line to define the edge as much as possible. I don't want there to be kind of these halos. What can happen as we encounter an edge, we tend to kind of tighten up our marks a bit, and it can lead to these halos on the edges. And for me, that degrades the form a little bit. It makes it harder to see. So I think it's part of my own kind of just weirdness, because I know other people that don't care at all about it, but it is what it is. And so as I'm thinking about that edge, I'm kind of working away from the edge and then building up to it. And so with this, again, an overhand grip, this modified grip here, I can use the side of the pencil to create these softer marks. And as I get into that edge, I can kind of tighten up a little bit, but I'm also kind of lightening up and just getting a little bit more delicate, and then backing away. It's just kind of like creeping up and then backing away. And just trying to feather that out a little bit to avoid that halo, because I want there to be a clear overlap of that fabric behind that edge of the cake and that vertical edge of the cake projecting forward. If I draw vertical lines in that background, the viewer's mind is going to look at that vertical edge of the cake and the vertical marks and say, hey, they're both running in the same direction, so they must belong together. So it's going to pop those vertical marks forward. So instead, I want to emphasize like this horizontal kind of intersection back there and make the direction of the marks a bit more ambiguous in that background, and try to create some visual separation there. So it's all really subtle, but I'm just looking at making some very basic decisions. Is this darker than that? Is this darker than that? As we go down along that edge, because it's always changing. And the more variation you can incorporate in an edge, the more kind of light and atmosphere you'll be able to create in your work. Let some of those edges kind of fade away and disappear, and let them be sharper in other areas. All right, and here we see this shift where now that background is lighter in value than the slice of cake. And we move up here, and this is darker than the cake. So we're seeing that alternating relationship between the two. It's one of the things that it's one of those areas where I fixate, is that visual separation. That's why, again, I kind of focus on the direction of the marks and those halos, because that can all affect that visual separation, but between the various planes. So with this blending stump, that's kind of one of the mantras of this course, or this show, is that you're always contributing to the form. So whether you have an eraser, whether you have a blending stump, it's how can you use that tool to contribute to the form and make a statement, make a declarative mark. Good questions today on this 100th episode. So now I'm starting to build up some charcoal on this paper, and it's not lifting so well, so that's all right. I'm going to get it as light as I can go, and I have a white charcoal if I need it. Oh, there's this right in here, there's a little reflection in the plate of the light bouncing off of the cake there. So I just lifted that off. So right in here, and as I work in that background, I'm switching to these circular marks, moving in and away, back and forth between the edge and that background. All right, now it's starting to come together. There's a point in the drawing process where things kind of click in the mind, you know, where you start to see it as a three-dimensional object. And that, I love that moment, and we're starting to get there. So when you're looking at this two-dimensional surface, you're thinking about moving back into space or forward, you know, layering things on top of one another. And you get to that point through these value relationships. It's one of the reasons, again, why I build up my drawings this way rather than creating a contour line and filling it in, is because once you see it as a three-dimensional object, then it makes it, you make different decisions about the proportions, and sometimes getting those proportions, it becomes a little bit easier to see accurately when you see the marks on the page as now a three-dimensional object. So with this kneaded eraser, I'm just gently lifting. I'm actually more smudging than anything, and gradually lifting. So looking at the texture on the cake, I think I want to use the tooth of the paper to my advantage when I get there. So I don't want to over smooth it out. All right, but I do, where the icing is here, I can smooth that out. And then I'm going to come in here. There's this kind of thin, dark area, and a similar technique is what we're using in the background. So just using the side of the pencil to kind of build up these areas. I'm thinking more about the kind of that starting in the center of that path, and then kind of building up to the edge there, and that's what's going to create that contrast. And hopefully, if I've got the values correct, that dark mark there will read as the white icing that's in shadow. And as we come back here, there's a kind of a thin dark line, but it's not quite as dark as up in here. So I'm going to keep it really light as we come down in here. And then I'm intentionally using an overhand grip because it tends to make these fine marks that read like thin shadows or thin forms rather than an outline or a contour line. So that's kind of what I'm thinking about right there. And now as we work on this side's in light, we get that thin dark area, but it's going to be lighter in value. So I'm really just tapping on the page and dragging down a little bit. So in this way, having a longer portion of the core of the pencil exposed, I can kind of align that along the diagonal path that I'm looking for and just kind of tap down there, and it creates a nice mark. And as we get into this jelly filling here, that same kind of thing. So I'm going to let the tooth of the paper do the work for me rather than really try to force my control over the material to create that filling. Got to come up a little bit. Now I'm going to switch direction of my mark. So we've got, as we're working on the texture of that filling, you've got two dimensions that you want to be aware of. There's the depth that's moving back at that angle. So we talked about the angle sighting earlier. So if you can establish what the angle is of that, you want to identify that, and you also have the vertical dimension of that plane. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to align the pencil with the angle that I want. And as I work my way back along that angle, I'm going to be dragging down. So both of those dimensions are being accounted for in this process here. And now it's not a straight line. It's a really jagged mark. And we come here, there's that icing that kind of tucks in underneath here. Kind of lost that angle a little bit, but how's that? Okay, that's working. And what I want to avoid is it feeling like a stripe that's kind of painted on that surface. It's part of that plane. It's that one plane that just transitions in value as we move down. Squint your eyes, and that helps you to see subtle value relationships and observe which of those forms disappear. Where does an edge become more clear? Where does it tend to disappear? Okay. Sylvia is saying you're struggling drawing this. Is there any kind of particular aspect to it that is challenging? Is it getting the proportions right, or is it the values? Or I'd be kind of curious to know more if you're so inclined. If not, oh, that's the other thing. Share your work when you're done. You can find the link I pinned it to the top of the chat as well as in the description for the page for this. And I'll update the description with things. So it's not just the 100th episode, but it's a piece of cake. It's what it is. But I love seeing everybody's work. That's been really awesome to see everybody share their work, especially. And I mentioned this a lot, is that with those of you who are vulnerable enough to share the mistakes, I think that's really awesome, and I applaud you. It can be intimidating, but I love seeing everybody's works. And all right, so as I'm kind of now refining this edge here, this side of the cake, I'm kind of working back and forth between the charcoal and the eraser. The whole thing needs to be a little bit darker. And again, using the side of the pencil, because that allows the tooth of the paper to kind of simulate some of the texture of the cake. And now the paper that you're using may be different from mine. This is a pretty rough surface here. It's got big toothy texture to it. And so if I need to refine it, I might have to do some trickery. But you may have, again, if you're using like a cotton rag paper, it's going to have a different tooth. All right, so as I move up this edge here, I'm doing the same thing, thinking about the path, but rather than draw a line this way, I'm creating short vertical marks that align with the vertical dimension of that slice of cake, that part of the cake, while kind of walking my way down that diagonal path. And in doing that, it tends to create a mark that feels more naturally formed, more like a shadow or a variation in value, versus a contour edge. Again, lines are symbols for edges. And so if I, in this case, I could draw a line. It is the edge of the object. But I want to be really kind of sensitive and delicate with it, and only use it when I need to really pull something forward. So like right in here, for example, if I want to bring that corner forward, I can drop in a harder, darker line, and the same with up in here. Help pull that forward. And start to add some kind of detail in there. I'll kind of work my way now from the front of that, work my way back. So I can create some kind of a depth of field as we go back into here, where this might be a little bit more out of focus. So as I come forward here, I can start to add some more of those details. So drop in some of the darker nooks and crannies. Now, in this case, I'm kind of using the reference, but I'm also using just what's happening on the drawing, the tooth of the paper. Rather than fight that, if I have these natural dark marks, I can use those to my advantage and darken some areas, and let that suggest some of the texture of the cake there. So I've switched to this tripod grip. It gives me a little bit more control, and I can engage the tip a bit more. So just kind of making a few quick decisions, and then glancing up at the drawing, seeing how it holds up. And then as you're indicating some of the texture, again, those little the holes and stuff in the cake, try to vary the marks as well. So you want to avoid kind of creating a stipple or like a regularly spaced kind of pattern of dots. It tends to draw the viewer's attention a bit more because it feels unnatural. And so, I might make a few little dots and then kind of drag some down and kind of push, pull, try to vary up the marks, make a few steps, move on, and try to change up that rhythm. I tend to get into a rhythm with my marks, and so I have to fight that instinct to avoid creating this kind of stamped like pattern-like effect in some of these areas. So just looking at some areas where there's a kind of a harder edge and where they get a little bit more diffused. And I'm going to move over to this side as well and get these little, where that jelly filling, jam filling is kind of seeping into the cake below it, which is pretty awesome. And so rather than draw a sharp line, I'm just kind of creating a series of dots and dashes, little constellations on the page, and then evaluating and seeing if I need more to define that edge or not. Rather than create a line that then I have to then break up, I'm just trying to sneak up on it, see how little I can get away with to define an edge. I feel like this whole thing needs to be darker in value, really drop that into shadow. It's got some bounce light happening in there, it's kind of some of the light bouncing off from this direction, but I think I need to make it all a little bit darker. And then I can, if it's too textury, like if the tooth of the paper is just too much, you can kind of smooth it out a little bit. So this is what happens like as I focus on the details, especially in the shadow area, I'm losing the forest for the trees there in a way. You get sucked into all of those little details, but it's really difficult to evaluate value relationships in sharp focus. The best way to observe value relationships is with kind of an indirect gaze, looking at looking at one area but putting your awareness on another, and try to study those value relationships. And so sharp focus is actually an inhibiting factor when you're trying to lock into those values. So it's important if you're getting sucked into those details, keep pulling back, keep trying to see the whole thing to make sure the primary value structure is holding up. I'm going to So right now I'm using this eraser and I'm kind of sharpening up the edge, but I'm trying to be really gentle with it, so I'm blending more than anything. There's a little bit of light that catches on here that I love. I love seeing that. What happens if I just do this? Use a kneaded eraser, see how that works. All right, how's everybody doing? Oh, Sylvia, back to you're saying that the proportions is what I'm having the most difficulty with. All right, yeah, it's tricky. Sometimes, you know, so if you get to the point where you feel like, you know, I'm just making a mess on the page, and you feel like you might need to start over, what I recommend doing is just staying with it. If you know that the proportions, you know, the drawing is just not going to work out, use this opportunity to really refine and make sure you understand those proportions well, and then maybe start another one. I try to never let a drawing go to waste. And I'm not sure what stage you're at right now if you're thinking about starting over again, but if you are, like I said, I would just kind of use your practice, use your first one as a practice drawing, and then you know, take those lessons from that practice drawing into the next one. Zephy, oh, the plate is killing you. Oh, good. I'm glad I'm not the only one. It sounds like some of you are also feeling that. And Tina is saying anyone can draw or paint, etc., but only genuine artists give birth to something that evokes awe and true spiritual experiences. Agree, disagree, why? Ooh, that's a good question. I don't, you know, I have, let me think about that. I think, you know, one question or one concern I have is that sometimes people feel like you have to call yourself an artist in order to create, and so I think I think not to necessarily counter your statement, Tina, but more to build onto it is that notion that it's kind of separating the act of creation from the role of the artist. I think something does shift when you get to the point where you're feeling like you have to make a living as it. You know, if you're making a living as an artist, then that might change things. But you know, sometimes what I worry about is sometimes people feeling like they have to. You know, just because they have an impulse to create, that then it comes with it all the baggage and the definition of being an artist, and that can be, you know, a source of pride for some people, but can be an inhibition for others. And so, you know, it's just like, you know, people who go out to dance don't necessarily call themselves dancers; they just enjoy the process. Or singing in the showers, you don't have to call yourself a singer or a musician to enjoy that. But I suspect that most of you here don't have that problem. I would enjoy a world where more people draw. I think that's what I would like to see. And sometimes people are a little afraid to, because they feel like they have to call themselves artists and do everything that comes along with that term. So my job is to try to override that impulse and say, just do it, because drawing is awesome. But there's also a lot of stuff in my life that I need to do that I don't. So people say, oh, you should do this or that. And I don't. I don't listen to their advice, so why should people listen to mine? Really fascinating conversation today. All right, let's see. I feel like let's tackle this part right here. That delay. Fix the delay between the picture of me talking and my hands, because the two different camera sources, there's a bit of a delay, and I know I can fix it, and I thought I had it dialed in, but it wasn't working today for some reason. All right, so as I work up here, what am I going to do? Okay, so I want to think about I'm going to kind of work my way from the foreground backward. And I'm going to think about these clumps of icing as solid forms first. So lay down some charcoal, bring out the old blending stump. I really like the way this bamboo paper, blends. I feel like I can really move the material around nicely. I have to just make that statement here. So I'm just blocking in this kind of this shape, and I'm going to try my best to not think about it as a blob of icing. Think of it as an abstract form. Think about where I'm making these marks in the shapes first, and then I'm going to refine that a little bit later. So how does that feels all right. Looking at the positive space and the negative space together, see how that aligns. All right, so now as a solid value, that's kind of my middle range. I'm going to come in here and then add the darker shadow. So on the right side here, again, the light's coming in from this direction, and so there's this shadow, this form shadow here. Kind of try to start in the center of the form, work your way out to sharpen that edge. And I love the way that gets pulled down into the white. And then I see these little folds and stuff in there. Just going to target the shape of the dark areas. And now, if I outline that form, I run the risk of it really popping off the page and creating too much visual separation. So as I get them to the edge here, I just want to be really delicate with it so it's not a heavy line, just a sharper edge. And then we have the shadow on this side. That. So it's starting to give kind of that three-dimensional form to that glob of icing there. And as I work up to that edge, again, keep the marks really light because I just want a sharper edge, but I don't want it to read as a line. So I can come back in with the eraser, work some of that negative space, sharpen up the edge over there. And then there's this little icing that kind of drags down there. And then down in here too. So in those small areas, I'm still trying to think in terms of shape and mass, even though they're really kind of fine marks that read very closely to lines. There's a little bit of light there, but this edge here is not very sharp, and I want to sharpen that up. There we go. So kind of just working back and forth using the eraser to refine an edge, using the blending stump, using the compressed charcoal. All right, and now we have some, I'm just going to use the blending stump to do some drawing back in here to try to indicate some of the confetti sprinkle stuff back there. Okay. Evaluating the plane here, so hopefully it starts to read as a triangular plane receding away from us. If it's not, then you want to kind of go back and visit these angles here, and in particular this height. How far, what's the vertical distance between that front corner and that back one? So I haven't really locked that down. I've got this general area defined, but I need to go in and add some detail there. So I'm going to pull out this here. And there's this kind of braided quality to the icing that is really interesting. I need to figure out how much I want to really tackle that. All right, so I'm going to smooth this out back in here. There's too much tooth of the paper that's affecting things, so I'm going to smooth that out. I also want to try to lift some of that. It's a little bit too dark back in there. So with the kneaded eraser here, it's just a really light touch and essentially cross-hatching with it, changing up the direction of the marks. And now evaluating it. The texture is too much, trying to smooth it out. And right now I'm kind of ignoring everything else in the area around it. We'll see how much time. We're coming up on 2 hours, holy smokes. Fly away, hello. Tina is saying, I've never drawn before. I just bought a beginner's course from Proco, but my concern is to get things right from the get-go. Life is short. Do you see my point? I do. I think I do. Yeah, I've seen his classes. They look pretty awesome. I've never taken one, but I think it's healthy to learn from as many people as possible. Really enjoy Brent Eveston. We filmed with him, and he's got his Art and Science of Drawing courses. I think those are great. And I think it's important to, explore different opportunities, different instructors, different approaches. I try not to think of myself as an instructor for this, even though I am kind of talking through my stuff, but I want this to be more about sharing approaches than sharing my approach, if that makes sense. Because there's been a lot that I have learned from you all in the audience. You have helped me out through many tricky spots in the drawing process. So. And I think in drawing in general, the best way to get good is to do a lot of it, and to practice in a particular way. And that's what we do here with Drawing Together, is we set ourselves challenges each week with a new subject, with the goal of simply just if we recognizing that if we dedicate ourselves to taking some time to draw, we're going to get better over time. And it's not about demonstrating perfection as much as recognizing opportunities for growth. So as I move across here, I'm doing my best to try to, again, not think about it as a series of braids, thinking about it as icing. I'm trying to think about it as shapes of light and dark. So what is that shape? Making a very quick decision about that shape, about what shape it is, as well as where it is, and go from there. And then make that statement on the page, and then evaluate, is that too dark, is it too light, is it the right shape? Now with this charcoal, I don't know how much detail I can really achieve, so I'm just going to kind of be gestural with it back in here. And one of the things we talk about in this show is that one of the reasons I follow this process of building the whole thing up at once is then it puts us in control of how much detail and where that detail is. And so if you are so inclined to stick with it and really dig in and get all that fun detail, then you can do that. If you want it to be more expressive and impressionistic, then you can do that as well. And I'm kind of somewhere in the middle, and I think we all have our own sensibilities with regard to detail and the role of detail and what experience that we want. Because sometimes I just, make a good drawing to have something that's super expressive, but I want to be detailed. I just want to get in there and enjoy all of that. But or sometimes it's the opposite, where the drawing itself might call for more detail, but I don't want to do that. I just want to move my arms, right, and get dirty, the charcoal. Okay. All right, so let me bring out the white charcoal. I'm going to see if I can lift out some highlights. It's not really doing a lot for me, but I can drop in some highlights here on the icing. Help give that a little bit more form, and then I can lose that tip there. So kind of doing some positive and negative drawing here, kind of refining these shapes. And I'm trying to kind of do a quick check-in, make sure that these shapes are lining up the way they need to. Right in here is the white, sometimes it doesn't mix so well with the dark charcoal, so you might have to erase up a little bit. All right. Oh, there's this nice little spot of light back in here that I like. How's that working out? I guess that's working out okay. Gonna pull out some of the highlights and the little cakey nuggets. So just kind of focusing on, or again, it's about refining edges. And that's where the detail comes in. So right as I work back in here, I'm using the white, but I'm trying to keep it light because I don't want to lift that out of the shadow. But I can use this more kind of as a blending tool than anything, and create some kind of separation from the texture and the tooth of the paper from that smooth icing. kind of do that in the plate as well. It's not a super bright white, but I can kind of use it more as a blending tool than anything. Let me erase this out. Yeah, I've kind of layered, I think, too much charcoal on here to lift off anymore. But what I want to make sure is that this is darker than that. So this is the white icing, but it's in shadow. It's a darker value. That's the white plate in light, so that's pretty bright. So I'm just using the white charcoal as a way to sharpen up that edge there. All right. Whew. Derek Johnson, should the bottom of the cake be a little thicker, making the corner of the cake off the plate? I don't know. Now I'm going to come back to this shape of the plate. So that's the part that I kind of moved away from because I was obsessing. But now that I have the cake more refined, I can see that this feels like it's just kind of, it's bulging off the page. So what I want to do is I want to break it down into a sequence of basic angles here. And see if I can understand the specific curve a little bit more accurately. So what I'm doing is that I have the reference image over here. I have a projection, the overhead projection, the same view that you're seeing I have in front of me. And so in that way I can kind of compare. That makes sense. But we are coming up on 2 hours, and I generally try to keep this show down to about 2 hours. We'll keep going for a little bit. You know, after about 2 hours, I think most of the decisions I'm going to make in a drawing have been made, and you can kind of see the process, and then we can each kind of go our own way and finish up as we need to. I'll keep going for a little bit. I feel like that's working a little bit better now in terms of the shape. But I kind of want to get back to Derek's question. I'm not quite sure I'm seeing what you're seeing. So if I'm missing something, if you want to kind of clarify that, it could be helpful. I encourage any sort of kind of observations, kind of critiques that can improve the drawing. So help me better understand what you're observing. Because what happens is we all do this. We get locked in on the drawing, right? I can't see it objectively anymore because I've been staring at this for 2 hours now, and so there's a certain amount of bias happening here, right? Where I want it to be correct because I've spent so much time fixing it, and that I'm overlooking opportunities for improvement. I guess it's kind of a confirmation bias is what I'm experiencing here. I want, my brain is trying to confirm for me that it's accurate when in fact it's not. All right, so I'm adding just a little bit kind of more detail, more refinement in some of these areas here. And we kind of talk about that a lot in this show, is if we build up the whole drawing at once, you know, gradually refine it, it puts us in the driver's seat of the detail. And we're each going to have our own sensibility about how much detail is really necessary. So I'm feeling like I need a little bit more in some of these areas here. As I'm adding this dark here, I'm realizing it's creating this tangent, this kind of extension of that form. So I need to feather that out a little bit. I want to darken and make a smooth transition in value. So it created this edge that I can't see from this angle. The way the light's bouncing off of it, I don't see that edge, but I see it clearly in the overhead projection. All right, Mary C., thank you for the comments. I appreciate it, everybody. Thank you, Claude. Greg is asking a question. As you picked up the white charcoal, I thought of a question. When working on graphite and you lose the white of the paper, no matter how much you erase, how would white charcoal do to help? Ooh, that's a good one. I think I added white charcoal to a graphite drawing recently. The challenge for me is generally has to do with temperature. So the white of the paper has its own temperature, has its own kind of luminous quality to it that is difficult to match with the white charcoal. And so that's just something that you want to watch out for. And so as I look at this, for example, where I added the white here to mix with that, it's a different quality of gray than the other grays around. And so it can get a little tricky, a little dicey. So you just want to be careful with that. And I would worry about that with graphite. And so I would just run some tests on a scrap piece of paper and practice with it before you apply it to one of your your time-intensive works. That would be pretty bold, and I would give you a lot of credit for going at it with one of your drawings there. But if you try it on a scrap and see how the temperature plays out, it could work really well. What's hard is with graphite, it's so silvery, so cool, and then when you mix the kind of the cool white charcoal, it can conflict with the natural temperature of the paper and end up kind of just being flat. So what I'm doing right now is I'm thinking more about that background as an abstraction, and I'm trying to just think about what would achieve balance. So as long as the background doesn't become too much of a distraction and it being unfinished, I think it should be all right. But I do want to darken this shadow here. If I feel like I've generally achieved the form of the plate effectively, then I feel like I can go for these shadows a bit, darken them up. Running out of things to say after 2 hours. I don't know about you, but I think I need a piece of cake. I think I've talked about this before. Like, my endurance when it comes to drawing is completely affected now. I used to be able to draw for hours and hours and hours. My favorite class was this. It was like 12 hours. We would draw for 8 hours, and there's about 4 hours of critiques and slides, and I loved it. I do not have that level of stamina anymore. My brain feels like I've just taken a test. And so, starting to fade. So just kind of refining that edge a little bit. I want to increase the transparency in that shadow. Right now it's such a solid shape. I'm doing some kind of drawing with the fingers. Lifting up the highlight on these folds here, and then where we cross into the shadow is an opportunity to kind of lift, to kind of continue the path of that highlight and gently kind of lift some of that to create some variation, and you get some transparency that way, to really help make that shadow feel more believable. Just a little bit of work in a shadow area can be sufficient to prevent it from feeling like just a flat shape. Another option is to go into the darker areas and push the darks even farther. But just try to observe the path of the light and the shadow as it goes into that shadow, and try to extend those paths. How's everybody doing? Anybody work with one of the other reference images? I'm kind of curious how those are coming along. I'm really hoping everybody will share on the show page on Artist Network. Because again, you'll find that link in the description or pinned at the top of the chat. All right. If I can. I do feel better about this curve. It feels like the plate is sitting more effectively now. Boy, that was a bit of a fight, wasn't it? Those ellipses. That's what makes drawing so much fun. It's like cracking the code. Right here. Drop in some of that shadow. So yeah, again, I've taken up enough of your time, so I'll probably sign off soon here. But again, I want to thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to draw with me, make this such an awesome experience, taking us all the way up to 100 episodes. And if you're new, all the episodes you can find on artistnetwork.com or on here on YouTube. We have a playlist, and I believe you can organize it by the release date. So you can, if you want to go in order, you can. But there's nothing inherent in each episode that makes the order of them important. You can kind of go do the one that you want to draw for that day. I do want to kind of smooth this out a little bit. Whew. I see a bunch of comments coming in and I can't keep up with them. without you guys just watching me read. That's kind of a boring thing. So okay, so what I'm doing down in here is that I find that when working with the reflections and things like that and shadows, this blending stump can be really a great tool. So rather than going for with the charcoal, which can be a bit aggressive for some of these more delicate marks, I'm trying to kind of smooth out some of these areas and observe some of the subtle variations in the plate, and that will help to kind of create that form. Just one of the things that can be helpful is just to keep rotating your blending stump so that it's evenly distributing the charcoal or picking it up if you're blending. So we'll see. This worked out okay. But again, it's all about drawing. It's all about drawing versus the drawing, right? You know, the drawing just becomes a physical manifestation of the experience we just had. And I like to prioritize the experience over the end result. Although if this had really fallen apart, I think my pride would have kicked in and I would have want to really stick with it. But I think it's important to enjoy what you're doing. So hopefully you've enjoyed the drawing process, kind of learned something, shared something. We're going to meet again next week. I haven't figured out the subject yet. I've been so busy thinking about this 100th episode. I still got a lot of planning to do for July. For the 101st episode, we'll see what we're going to do. I'm excited for that. So check back. We do meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. Keep an eye out on Artist Network. If you haven't signed up for the newsletter, you can find out that way. For the special drawing party that we're going to have, we're going to be announcing that very quickly through the newsletters there. So check that out. So if you haven't signed up for the Artist Network newsletters or the membership, $10 a month, you can become a member and get all access to all the videos that we have in the library, plus magazines, digital issues, things like that. So check out the membership there too. You can kind of stay up to date with things. So we're hopefully going to be doing more kind of special episodes and special kind of interviews and things like that with artists. I may keep working on this, and then I'll post the final version. Since we haven't seen the final version, I'll post that on the show page. So you have to go to Artist Network to check that out. All right. I appreciate it. I thank you all for your kind comments, for staying with me for so long. Yeah. I think I'll sign off now. Like I said, I'll keep working on this. I'll post the final version on Artist Network. So hopefully that will work. I've had some issues building those pages in the past. So, all right. Thank you all. Have a fantastic week. Have a fantastic weekend. We got the 4th coming up, so hopefully everybody can have a joyous time with friends and family. So, all right. Bye, everybody.